Morning all. I was flattered to see one of my engine versus engine game commentaries featured on Reddit just yesterday. It's still up there today. And recently there was also a Komodo Stockfish mega final with so many rounds. And Jan-Iver Ulekliv, apologies for pronunciation, 2 months ago indicated you should consider commenting on Game 8 in the SuperFinal. It showed Stockfish's anti-engine display, which reminds me of how Nakamura is playing Blitz against certain engines. Okay, so Komodo 7X was playing Stockfish, and let's see, D4, I'm not sure about the 7X actually, just let's say Komodo. So D4, and Stockfish played D5, and we saw a Slav defense. I'll put on live book here. Nf3 Nf6, theoretical so far. The most common is Knight C3 here. I've got 35,000 games where E3 was played. Bishop F5. So this bishop could be a target, even though it's outside of the pawn chain later if black plays E6. Sometimes it is a target like this. And when this happens, the bishop sometimes drops back. So just bear that in mind. Knight C3, E6, and the bishop is prone to attack, and it is actually attacked now, and this is the top theoretical move. Knight H4, bishop drops back, and here often knight takes G6 is played immediately, but there is this move as well, bishop E2, which was played. Knight Bd7. Note that with this move black isn't that keen immediately to try and castle kingside. There is a possibility, an increased possibility, of castling queenside here. And white now, usually in this position, actually castles, 290 games just castling here. And that's interesting because actually knight takes G6 was played here, which has been played before, HG. And you see that black's got that H-file pressure on H2, which could be handy. It could be a source of weakness provocation, actually. White now castles, and in fact, for free, black can provoke a weakness with queen c7 now, which is what it played, just threatening the mate in one. So to cope with this, how can white cope with this? Well, there's multiple ways. H3, F4, or G3. For my Stockfish here, it seems H3 is slightly more accurate, it seems, than the others, for whatever reason. If we look at H3 here, it has subtly weakened these dark squares. I think there's something interesting about this to observe these specific details, because I think these very, very high level engine games tell us something about the properties of chess, that black seems to have got something for nothing, a weakness provocation leading to slightly weaker dark squares in white's camp. Is that at all potentially significant? Is this H-file significant? Maybe these double pawns are very bad, or can they go like this later? Does white need to keep an eye on G4? So these are big questions. For the moment, black takes on C4, bishop takes C4. So the eye is kept a little bit less on that G4 square for the moment. But here now, black castles queenside. And with these pieces here, it would take a long time to use that C-file, it seems, or to try and smash black with B4, B5. The B4 square is controlled at the moment anyway. And we see here now white playing bishop D2. Okay, black now plays king B8. Maybe in advance of any C-file operation, it's useful to have the king here rather than the C-file. Bishop E2 is played, again controlling that G4 square, so it's again in advance of this. This is quite useful surely, and it gets out of the way on that C-file, making rook C1 and knight B5 potentially useful in the future, because the queen is another sensitive thing on the C-file. Now a strange looking move, which I don't think many humans would consider, because I think it would be rejected because it helps white with their plans arguably. This next move, strange looking, bishop b4, you'd think that white might be interested in a3, b4, b5 in any case without any prompting. So an amazing thing to consider. Is why is this a good move? Well, it does commit White's pawn structure a little bit more. You know, pawns cannot go backwards, and so if this idea of A3, B4, B5 is not that effective, then is this actually creating some light square weaknesses? It was actually played, and here my Stockfish is actually indicating, well, maybe taking is okay with knight e4, only on a certain depth, but the powerful one actually retreated the bishop here to e7. So is that job done in inverted commas, or is it just helped White with b4, b5? Well, let's have a look here. If b4, is that such a big deal? Knight b6, and let's say b5. Black can react with c5. It's not so easy after c5, and there's d-file pressure, so not so easy to make use of this. So here, okay, White actually played rook c1, which seems to imply that well, this c-file is going to be useful tactically for knight b5s, and that might afford White actually some tactical ideas later, if nothing else. Knight b6 was played. Here, rook e1, and now Black gets aggressive. Stockfish gets aggressive with the move g5. Okay, remember there's this constant forcing move tactic of knight b5, and the Komodo engine makes use of that here with seemingly a very good move at different levels, tactically, positionally. What is Black actually threatening? No, Black wasn't actually threatening g4, that is locked down, but maybe to build up pressure, maybe e5 on the center. So White now lashes out with e4, dropping, it seems, the d pawn, but it's that tactic which makes this possible, the knight b5 tactic, that actually White has just attacked now g5. Is there an adequate way of defending this? I mean, if we play knight here, it seems very, very passive. White could just get on with things, surely. Bishop d3, queen b3, because there's always this tactic here, you know, rook takes, there's knight b5, this tactic, it seems. But in fact, Black didn't have any of that. That's not defending this pawn. Black actually played rook takes d4. And this makes the game, for me, very interesting, actually. This is an exchange sacrifice, a hint of creativity. And it's something to look out for in these engine games. What is this creativity based on? Obviously a lot of brute force calculations, but it's amazing to consider that this exchange sacrifice would be very good. But if we look historically at this game, Black seemed to get something for nothing. Black prompted some dark square weaknesses earlier, and it seems this exchange sacrifice has a particular idea in mind to add to that pressure on the dark squares. After knight b5, the exchange sac is played not by moving the queen. I don't think this is very good. If the queen moves, knight takes d4, the exchange sac is not very as good here, and in fact Black in fact tactically loses the queen here to check. Ouch. So it can't actually be played like that at all. But even if it could be played like that, say it wasn't so bad with that check, I think there's a good reason why this is a better way of playing it. Black now plays rook takes d2, and strategically the dark square bishop has been removed. So let's consider that for a moment. The dark square bishop has been removed in this exchange sac. Black was already kind of strong from earlier on the dark squares in a way, because White had played this h3 compromising some of the dark squares, and there's still h-file pressure. And we get a remarkable symptom of all this now. After queen takes d2, Black prompts the exchange of queens actively with queen f4. I'm not sure other things would be that good here at all, but let's have a look. White also seems to be, you know, potentially building up pressure, or, you know, knight takes a7 for queen a5. Let's have a look at say queen e5. I think this is given actually as quite good. Actually, that does control the a5 square, so knight takes a7 is not on, but we're controlling the a5 square. But queen c3 is given as better for white. So black is actively, if queen c8, queen takes g5 or queen a5 is going to be very, very strong. So black actively goes for the exchange of queens, the exchange down. How actually strong is black on the dark squares here? Well, white takes on f4, g takes f4, and this is actually very interesting, this double pawn transformation, because actually the blockade square e5 seems a little bit more significant than it would have been before, because there's no pawn here on the d file to chase a blockading piece on e5, and it's difficult to get a pawn to f4 with that pawn there, and even difficult to undermine the f4 pawn because of the h file pressure. So black seems to be well suited here for a strong blockade on e5, and we see after the knight retreat black goes for this very strong blockade with knight e5 coming up. So it seems white is getting sat on. You know, sometimes we can say that in human games, white is getting sat on with this huge blockading knight, which is difficult to kick out of that square. It's a nice central square. Also, black of course has got the dark square bishop. Black is strong on the dark squares here, and we witness now what might be one of the most vivid demonstrations of dark square blockade in engine games that has ever been seen in a high level engine match. We see rook c2 first, a5. There's even an idea that this a3 is going to be punished now on the light squares, with a light square strangulation coming up. Rook d4 b5. You can see that if a4 is played, then the light squares are getting gripped. Rook d1, king b7. And you see black's building up now, a light square grip as well. So it's a symphony on light squares and dark squares, with a fantastic dark square blockade on e5 so far. To intensify the grip, it would be nice to have a knight here, for example, to have a knight there, stopping any tactical b3. Rook b1 as though b3 is useful. And here now, knight fd7. So if white tries to break this light square bind, what would happen here? White actually played knight e2, attacking f4. But let's have a look. b3, or a takes, rook takes, knight c5, rook moves, and I think white has a target here, and the move which would be good in this position apparently is king c7. So if white tries to get rid of the target, you know, black's going to be locking down on that target. Let's say a4, then this is actually possible. It seems b takes, and that's better for black. This is an interesting variation here. If rook a8, then there's the pin, but black in this position still better apparently with knight c3, and it's better for black apparently on my engine. So it seems to be that the point is that this light square grip cannot be easily unbound here, it seems, with b3. There's a specific reason. So white plays knight e2, black protects the f4 pawn. And now I think b3 is more simple to understand why it's not working. Just taking and rook a8, we've got a lockdown, basic lockdown on the a pawn. So here, in this position, knight d4 is played, bishop c5, rook d1. Now the king comes up. It looks as though black's pieces are not going anywhere. They're very well entrenched on these dark squares. Bishop e2. And now a very interesting decision actually. Black's stronger on the dark squares, and you'd think might be keen to keep the dark square bishop, but it's actually given up here with bishop takes d4. After rook takes d4, rook b8. So black has got something very cunning up its sleeve actually, that this c pawn can go here, and this knight can go to c5. And we see this happening now. c5, okay, and now c4, and it's locking out the bishop from the game, this construction. and getting a partner, a nice partner in crime, knight on c5 now. Obviously b3 is totally locked down now as well. g3, you might think, is that one of White's last breaks here? g3 to try and break. It wasn't played, but it doesn't actually do anything. It can be ignored. Maybe just the rook can just come back here, for example. It doesn't really do anything, so White didn't even bother with that. Bishop d1. But you can see that the pawn breaks have been taken away from White, and the knights are now seemingly very powerful indeed. f3, condemning the bishop with White's own pawn structure. What was the reason for this? Well, knight takes e4 was threatened. Pretty mundane actually. If rook e2, then f3 might be good here. If say takes, knight cd3, and we've got knight f4 on the cards, and things get very nasty indeed. The bishop would be a spectator piece. Dare I say that expression too much, like I have in the past. Anyway, so f3, condemning the bishop. You can see that we have now fantastic knights reveling in this position. Nimzovich will be proud. It also is a little bit like a Nakamura game, that White's play is without any ability to change the pawn structure. The soul, the very soul of the game, the pawn structure, it's been fixed by White, confined like a prison in this pawn structure here with this light square bishop. Knight c6. Black is up to an even more aggressive knight outpost to be reinforced now on d4. Bishop c2, e5, rook d5, knight e6 now. So both knights looking at d4, rook d1. And here, a strange looking move. I'm not sure what White was actually threatening. I don't think White was threatening much. Rook a8. But actually, rook a8 strengthens a4, making b4 possible in the distant future, if it wasn't for the c4 pawn. For the moment, Black now entrenches on d4, rook h1, as though h4 is on the cards. The rook comes back for that, rook h8, rook d1, and now the king strengthens the d4 post, with king b6 coming up potentially to c5. Rook h1, not yet though. Knight a5 is played, a possibility. Rook d1, and now king c5. Bishop d3. White looks helplessly on here. This doesn't actually do anything. Rook b8. Bishop f1. Okay, it keeps an eye on c4 just in case b4 is on the cards. Here b4, yes, it might be possible to actually do something here with rook takes c4 and rook c1. There's no rush to do anything like this, even though Black's better here. No rush. Just king d6 is played. g3, trying to free the position. A bit too late, surely. Weakens h3. Rook h8, tying down the bishop. g4, further condemnation, locking in of the bishop. Rook b8, rook a1, king c5. Black is toying with White here, increasing the grip somehow. Knight db3, attacking a rook. King goes back. Rook h8, making sure h4 is not possible. King f2, king c5, king e1, knight d4. And these rooks are having to defend these horrible weak points, f3 and h3 here. Rook b8, as though b4 is again on the cards. And here, after king e1, in fact, there's no tactics about c4 which is of any significance here. So b4 is actually played. Starts to create new targets now, notably b2. So White's pieces are very much on the defensive here. You might think, well, you know, h4 is pointless if b2 is going to be dropped, so that's really stopped h4 as well, this break with b4. Rook a3, knight ab3 is played. Cutting the rook's protection of f3, so knight takes f3 is now threatened. Rook f2 protecting f3, knight b5 hitting the rook, and the other one on the third rank goes to d4 now. This knight is actually useful now for a3 to try and break through with things like rook b1 or rook b3 to hit f3. And in fact, after rook a1, this is now played a3 as a pawn sack. It blocks in the rook as well by its own pawn. And now after rook b3, this is a passed pawn. This is attacked horribly. Knight c2 is potentially on the cards of bishop e2. So this pawn's difficult to defend. Also, this pawn is also attacked. Let's see, for example, if a4 was played here. In this position, actually, crushing, apparently, is not to take here. Rook takes f3 as possible. Rook e3 check is crushing here. If bishop e2, knight c3, and the two knights and the rook gang up on the poor e2 bishop, grabbing that here. So that's to be avoided. a4. Let's have a look at that again. If we examine just another move here, king d1, there's knight c3 check, and it gets horrible off knight b3 check, winning that rook on a1. So okay, this little break with a3 is a bit painful. Rook b3, white gives up, basically gives up a piece. Bishop takes c4. Black plays king takes c4. White tries to use this little resource, this a pawn, past a pawn. It's not going anywhere though. Knight a3, and the knights are running rampant in white's position, hitting the rook on a1. Rook c3, threatening knight e3 check now to win that rook. King b3, all sorts of things are now threatened. Again, knight takes not knight takes f3, that's illegal. Knight takes f3 check here with this one is now on the cards because that knight is protected by the king. Rook cf1, humbly protecting f3. The king takes on a4. So two knights against the rook. White's not going to survive too much longer. In this match, it was after a certain evaluation is reached by both sides that the operators resign on behalf of the engines. So already it's like nearly +5 here on my engine view. Rook e3. h4, very desperate move, but black is now threatening after this rook e1, the installation knight e1, painful on f3, to which there will be no defence. The king would not be able to defend via g2 after knight e1. So this is desperate. It's just taken. Rook c1. Now here, rook e1 was played actually. A lot of things win in this position already. Rook f1. The rook on c1 is taken. Rook takes c1. And here finally, it was resigned for white with this move actually. Black could continue just munching on f3 here. As example continuation, knight takes f3 check. King b2. The knight could come back. A knight could come back to d4. This is just easily winning. Let's give white a move. Say check. Knight takes e4. We've got two passed pawns, and you can see it's quite inevitable that black is going to be winning here. So I thought that was a remarkable game. It's quite a long game, but I think a key thing about it is how dark square control can be added to via an exchange sacrifice. I think it was really added to in quite spectacular fashion. From a human point of view, this is outrageous, this bishop b4 for bishop e7. This doesn't make sense, as though it's giving white a plan. But actually, when it comes down to it, this isn't that useful. b4, b5. So the dark square grip here is really added to with this exchange sack, letting white use that knight b5 tactic. So the exchange sack here, getting the queens off. The e5 blockade was very impressive, and black was willing even to give up the dark square bishop to get another knight, a partner knight, on c5 later. White's bishop got worse and worse throughout this game, the light square bishop. So I think this is a very good example of destroying the opponent's counterplay. It just so happened it was an engine versus engine game. An impressive display, just gradually inflicting B4 on white to have further targets of attack, notably F3 coming up. So the F3 point extremely weak. White desperately giving up a bishop. The A pawn munched, and then F3 is the next target on the list. And eventually it was resigned. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that game and got something out of it. Something about chess, maybe, fundamentally, about dark square weaknesses and how they can be added to subtly through sacrificing. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.